I wanted to introduce an idea that I like to call the gestural envelope, um, which combines a couple different ideas, that of a gesture and gesture mark, gestural. That's a whole sort of big fun conversation, as well as the idea of an envelope, which is sort of another way of coming at a drawing and trying to simplify it first and then get more specific. I have a couple shapes here that I'm going to do a example demonstration of an envelope. But first I'm going to talk just quickly about how I think of gesture. If it may be a term you've heard, it may not be a term you've heard, but oftentimes the term gesture is referred to in many different ways. The way I'm going to sort of talk about it just right now is the notion of an overall average of some basic line, some basic motion, some simplified version of what one line might look like to explain a very complex line. It occurred to me that if you're at all familiar with stock market charts, okay, now that's a little bit nerdy, I realize, but when you see people sort of talk about stock market or any kind of trend, I suppose it doesn't have to be, and trying to average it out, you'll often see this is kind of the line of the daily action or something. And then when you start thinking about it and averaging it out to get a sense of what overall is going on, you create sort of a line that cuts off a little bit, adds a little bit, and averages out in a way that will sort of describe the overall direction and kind of curviness or non-curviness. That's a nice technical. So, for example, if I was drawing a tree or something like that, if this is one side of a tree I was trying to draw, I certainly wouldn't start out trying to draw this, but I would, as a gestural mark, I would sort of average it out and think of it like that. Shapes can start, sides of shapes. I feel like I'm trying to help us, describe and draw shapes still. But if it was something like this, that would be kind of tricky. So I might sort of try to break it down into something more like that. I might not, but I would try to kind of see how I could describe the overall feel of this line. I might think maybe for that one, even though it's really simplifying it, I might do something more like that. So it does get to it gets a little bit more feel-oriented, emotional response-oriented, so it's not so exact. A simple sort of, relatively simple line like this could be just simplified in that sort of fashion. So I'm cutting off a little bit here, I'm adding a little bit there. So that is that's how I'm going to sort of think about a gestural line. It's really sort of more of an indication of how of an average overall movement direction and of some part of some form. So that's the gestural aspect. When the notion of an envelope or envelope, I'm going to have fun with that one, I'm just warning you now, is more that of imagining what's if you took a string or a rubber band and stuck it around the perimeter of some shape, what that would look like. So if I did that literally with this shape, it would be something like this. If it was a really good string and I did it tight, or a really good rubber band, it would be something like that. If I did it for something like this, technically an envelope would sort of come straight there, straight there. You might say that, maybe like that, maybe like that. The idea is that, you know, I suppose a good rubber band would follow that curve. But one of the ideas is that we're trying to simplify the outer perimeter in a way that simplifies but helps us get to the overall shape. What I am proposing is that this can feel too mechanic. And Lord knows we've been doing a lot of mechanical stuff. And the notion of adding a gestural element to this idea of an envelope is something that I want to try to get across. The idea of 3 to 4 sides is to help simplify and start making you start sort of making some decisions about sort of overall trends of a shape. It can be hard to do, but it is a fun challenge to try to break anything up into first 3 gestural marks, a gestural envelope. Eventually, probably usually need to get to 4, but let's see. If I was going to do, if I only had 3 gestural marks to describe this shape, I would probably do something like this. And I say probably because part of this is like I say, an emotional kind of response to see how it feels. So that might be how I would describe, I might start describing that shape, given only 3 sides. It's going to force me to sort of average out complex things that are going in and out. You see how I've added some to this and cut off that, added a little bit here. So it's nowhere near as sort of exact and finding that point and drawing a line through it. It's much more sort of shooting from the hip, or more from like a gut feel. I'll come back to that one in a bit. I'm going to try to sort of imagine 3 sides for each of these. This one I might do something like this. So the degree that you're you know, allowed to curve one side is certainly up to you. If I had only 3 for this one, I would probably do something like this. If I had only 3 for this one, and here hopefully you're noticing that this is basically the shape of the Charlie Harper illustration dog head. So if I only had 3, I might do something like this. And why am I even talking about this? As we continue to draw, we're going from the big picture overall, looking at what's happening in a drawing overall, and relating that to smaller parts, and relating the parts back to the whole, and relating the whole to the parts, and the parts to the whole. So there's this constant sort of whittling away. And the idea of a beginning with, I know we've been talking about a bounding box, is partly a way of seeing really the biggest chunk of everything. And then we're going to start whittling, kind of chopping away in a little bit more of a organized fashion, trying to define an overall sort of gestural averaging out of what a perimeter might look like, both for individual shapes and for an entire drawing. I'm going to end this here, and I'm going to continue on with more about gestural envelopes.